Good day, everybody. Zach Lindquist here, otherwise known as the Ben Shapiro you got on Wish.com, and I would actually like to read a little quote from one of my namesake's books, The Right Side of History. After World War II, there remained a hole at the center of Western civilization, a meaning-shaped hole. That hole has grown larger and larger in the decades since, a cancer eating away at our heart. We tried to fill it with the will to action. We tried to fill it with science. We tried to fill it with world-changing political activism. None of it provides the meaning we seek. End of quote. Now, one of those political actions that Ben Shapiro mentioned that Western civilization took up in its pursuit of meaning was the sexual revolution, which I guess technically you can say started in the 1950s, but really hit its stride in the 1960s. And of course, the sexual revolution was man's seeking of fulfillment through physical pleasure and loveless promiscuity, because I guess somehow sex without love was supposed to make life worth living. I always thought that love was the determining factor, but that's neither here nor there, because of course trying to fill a void in our hearts with such goals as pleasure and promiscuity ultimately leads people to feeling a little bit more than empty. It's a lifeless husk, pretty much, if all you seek is pleasure and nothing else. If all you desire is to clench your fist around what you want, your hand is neither free to give or to receive. You cannot give love, nor can you receive love, because your hand is gripped so tightly around lustful pursuits. It doesn't really feel like a life of substance to me. Now, all of this is to say that I really don't think that the sexual revolution was particularly good for the culture, for society, for the world more broadly. And I don't mean to imply that the sexual revolution never ended, because it's most definitely still going on. The transgender movement did not grow out of nothing, right? That is the sexual revolution all the way. Because I'll say it again, I've said it many times before, sexual issues always escalate. Sexual sin always escalates. And this happens on a societal scale as well. Right? And we started eliminating stigmas back in the 1960s and embracing various forms of depravity, and that has escalated since then.
You lack discipline.
Since the 1960s. We've had a very long time to get to where we're at. This did not come out of nowhere. Right? We started eliminating more and more stigmas and embracing more and more depravity and normalizing more and more behaviors. And this is where we've ended up. This is the natural direction of the sexual revolution. This should not be a surprise to us. Things in our culture have gone significantly downhill since the sexual revolution, and I'm not pulling that claim out of thin air. Okay, I have the receipts. All right, the sexual revolution was a catalyst for various ills that plague our society, or at least the escalation of those ills. We decided to turn our back on virtue as a culture and embrace other things. And we are reaping what we sowed. We are seeing the results. And I have them here for you. Since the sexual revolution, there have been significantly more abortions in the United States. And I do mean significantly. And yes, I know that Roe v. Wade happened around the same time as the sexual revolution. And that's not a coincidence, obviously. I mean, there is a definite correlation there. But in 1965, there were 794 total abortions nationwide in the U.S., full stop, that we know of. Right? Now, only 5 years later, that's 5 years only, after the sexual revolution had hit its stride and done its thing for the most part, that number left from 794 to 56,035. That's 5 years later. Now, by the year 2000, that number went from 56,000 to 1,306,709 children killed in the womb. That's barely less than 25%. That's 1/4 of the children who were actually born that year. That is a lot of children. That is a lot of children who were not allowed to live. Again, since the sexual revolution, rates of divorce have absolutely skyrocketed, because apparently being sexually promiscuous before marriage, and in some cases even during marriage, tend to make marriage a bit more difficult. Who would have thunk, right? But anyhow, the rates of marriages ending in divorce in the 1960s, let's say specifically 1964, was approximately 24%. Now, of course, if you account for repeat offenders, people who get divorced multiple times and remarried multiple times, and if you really just shave that down to first-time marriages, then that that divorce rate is really closer to the mid-teens, maybe even in the lower teens. Nobody ever does that for some reason. That accounts for those repeat offenders. Anyhow, 15 years or so later, after the height of the sexual revolution, let's say, looking at specifically 1979, divorce rates reached 53%. That's literally double, if not, I mean, it's a bit more than double. Now, that figure has remained relatively stable to this day, with some fluctuations downward and then back up again. But again, you can shave that number pretty much in half if you account for repeat offenders, people who got married multiple times, divorced multiple times. For first-time marriages, the divorce rate is closer to 20 to 25%. It seldom reaches 30%. Now, that's still too high if you're asking me. It's still higher than the ideal. We don't want people to get divorced in such high numbers. A quarter is still too many. A fifth is still too many. But that number, all the same, has risen notably since the sexual revolution, although it's still not as high as the half of all marriages and, tragically, scare tactic that you're used to hearing. Since the sexual revolution, there has also been more single parenting, more children being raised without a father figure or without a nurturing mother, and yes, there's also been an increase in orphans and children in foster homes. But focusing on the single parenthood for the moment, in 1960, there were approximately 6.9 million single-parent homes in the U.S. Now, since everyone in the sexual revolution decided that marriage was optional or obsolete, that number has now risen to 37 million. That's as of last year, in 2021. And you can't say that that's all because of an increase in population in this country, because our population has been on the decline since, again, the sexual revolution. That's our next point. As far as birth rates go, the United States has been pretty consistently below replacement levels since 1971. And we're only hitting record lows in recent years. I mean, this is not getting better. It's only getting worse. And the children who are being born into broken homes. But all the same, since the sexual revolution, people have stopped having children. They're not getting married and they're not having families. That's the long and short of it. I mean, you can attribute this to hookup culture or to materialism, prioritizing material goods and a certain selfish lifestyle over a life of substance, and certainly to an astronomical porn consumption, because certain people would rather be in their own little rooms and being lovers to themselves rather than go through the effort of finding an actual real-life human being and connecting with them.
That is sad.
This is a wide-scale problem these days. You see my last video about that. People have simply stopped believing in the single most stabilizing agent of society, and that would be marriage. Okay, and if you devalue marriage, then you send us on the same trajectory as every other major civilization that has devalued the institution, and that would be a gradual but total collapse. And I'm not exaggerating here. Anthropology is 100% clear on this point. Okay, marriage and family are 100% essential for a functional and healthy society. Nations that minimize marriage in favor of other pursuits, look at ancient Rome, Greece, Babylon as just three prominent examples, they all crumble and die.
Death is all around us.
Since the sexual revolution, there have been significantly higher rates of depression and anxiety, and yes, this is particularly true of women. Because as it turns out, soul-leeching promiscuity is not particularly good for your mental or emotional health. Every time a woman specifically is sexually active with a man, she leaves a part of herself with that man. And no, this is not just theology. This is also psychology and physiology. When a woman is sexually active, her body secretes a hormone known as oxytocin. This is more commonly known as the bonding chemical, and it has a very prominent role in something that is known as sex glue. When a woman is intimate with a man, her body secretes oxytocin, and this bonds her body and soul to her partner. This is a real thing that happens. It's the same hormone that is secreted when a woman is breastfeeding her newborn baby. It helps her to bond to her newborn child. Right? And as far as intimacy goes, as far as sex goes, it's supposed to bond her body and soul to her spouse. This is supposed to cement their union. And done right, this does a very fantastic job of that, right? So she is So when a woman has sex with a man, she literally bonds to him, and this is irreversible. Now, that being said, this bonding process can have some drawbacks if sex and intimacy is misused or abused. For example, every time a woman moves on to a different partner, every time she changes her sexual partner, her body knows it. And so every time she moves on to a new partner, her body begins to secrete less and less and less oxytocin, the bonding chemical. Thus, it bonds her less to these men. Now, this is basically her body's defense mechanism against herself, against her own self-destruction. Because if she bonds herself too much to each of these men, she hollows herself out very, very quickly. And she begins to feel dehumanized, which is sad but true. And so her body is trying to compensate and keep her held together. And now, after a while, after a woman bonds to so many men, she literally physically can no longer achieve the same thrill or excitement from intimacy that she once could. And eventually this can make marriage very difficult. This can make relationships in general very difficult because she has a hard time just bonding. Abusing sex and intimacy outside of their proper context does have a tendency to leave people feeling hollowed out. And this one factor of women feeling dehumanized in the hookup culture contributes plenty to rates of anxiety and depression. And I could spend all day talking about other factors that may play a role, but I think this one may hit the hardest. There was nothing liberating about the sexual revolution. People have simply allowed themselves to become slaves to their desires of the flesh, and we are paying the price for that on a massive scale. Sir Roger Scruton said that sexual desire presents us with a choice: adoration or appetite, love or lust. Lust is about taking, but love is about giving. End quote. We have become a culture largely obsessed with taking all that our narcissistic selves can grasp. We give very little, and as a parallel, we love very little. It's about time for the ideas of the sexual revolution to return to the dust, for us to relearn what it is like to live for love rather than for lust, to adore rather than consume, and to live for a greater purpose than that of the fulfillment of selfish urges, whether that would be in the material goods sphere or in the sexual desirous sphere. Humans are purpose-driven beings, after all. That is what we are, and we all need something far more significant than pleasure for its own sake in order to be fulfilled. Now, I personally choose to live for God and to pursue His purposes to the best of my very limited ability. And you will have to decide for yourself what the focus of your life is going to be, if you haven't already. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you appreciated what you heard, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It will really help me out immensely. You can also find me on Rumble, Twitter, and Facebook. And of course, if you have not yet, don't forget to check out my book, Back to the Basics of Love, a single Christian's guide to dating, sex, and morality in a secular world. I truly believe in this book, so I would love for more people to read it and spread the word about it. Thank you so much for your time, and God bless.